Streams of molten rock flowing down a black and barren landscape. The dramatic scene is captivating. Explorers, both past and present, have been drawn to these rare active volcanoes. Through careful observation, much has been learned about how lava flows and the fantastic forms it leaves behind. Ancient Hawaiians, living among some of the world's most active volcanoes, first noticed that the surfaces of lava flows tended to be of two types. They called the smooth, ropey flows pahoehoe, and the jagged, rubbly flows a'a. Today, scientists around the world use these Hawaiian words to describe basaltic lava flows and their solidified forms. While most active lava flows in the United States are confined to Hawaii, there are many large lava fields scattered throughout the American West. Multiple eruptions of both pahoehoe and a'a over thousands of years have made these harsh volcanic landscapes. A'a flows look like immense piles of red-hot glowing rubble bulldozing their way downslope and crushing anything in their path. The top of the flow is loose rubble that cascades off the sides and front, obscuring the molten core. The size and power of these flows are indications that the interior is very stiff and resistant to movement. The height of a'a fronts varies greatly. Slow-moving large flows may pile up to heights of 50 feet or more. Smaller a'a flows can be just 5 to 10 feet thick, with surging fronts that are even thinner. A'a flows advance a lot like the tread of a tank. As the molten core deforms downslope, the cooler rubble on top tumbles off the front and is run over by the lava flow. While the lower rubble layer doesn't actually move, it creates a sandwich-like structure in the cool lava flows, rubble on the top and bottom, with a very dense interior that was once the molten core. The incandescent core exposed at the front of the flow cools rapidly. Blocks of this stiffer, more solidified material calve like ice from an advancing glacier as the flow moves steadily downhill. This jagged rubble, called clinker, forms when pieces of the core are pushed to the outside and are torn from the face of the flow. The pieces develop sharp spines as they are pulled from the sticky core. A'a clinker also forms on the surface of slow-moving channels, just behind the spreading flow front. Upslope, the lava rivers are smoother and faster, but clots of solidifying lava can be seen bobbing within the channel. Farther away from the advancing front, lava flowing within the channel may have a very fluid appearance. Lava balls form when blocks of channel wall fall into the lava stream. As they are swept along, the lava balls roll and tumble and become coated with layers of lava. Big pieces of the channel wall can dam the lava river and cause overflows. Lava balls are often found stranded by overflows on the edges of channels or rafted along on a'a fans near the flow front. The fronts of most a'a flows advance about 1 mile per hour. Really large a'a flows on steep slopes can move faster than 5 miles per hour. Smaller a'a flows on shallow slopes may move less than a few hundred yards in an hour. There's a big difference between the slow advance of flow fronts and the higher speed of lava moving in channels. Lava in channels typically travels more than 10 times faster than the front. Fronts fan out as they move downhill, pouring lava over a much broader area than the channel. This causes the lava to slow and cool more quickly. The lava that spreads out to the edges of the fan stagnates, forming levees that confine the advancing channel. On shallow slopes, the fans broaden and branch into multiple lobes. Large eruptions on flat ground may produce huge sheets of with no distinct channels. Pahoehoe lava looks so different from that it's hard to believe the two types are related. The missing link is a transitional form called slabby pahoehoe. It's created when pieces of once smooth pahoehoe crust are ripped and twisted, tumbling off the front as the flows advance. Slabby pahoehoe flows generally advance at about the same speed as similar size flows. Sometimes the fronts of slabby flows more closely resemble as they creep forward. The molten lava can appear to be very thick and sticky in parts of the front. A closer look into the interior of a slabby flow shows that the fluid can behave a lot like silly putty, being pulled slowly into long strings. The fronts of the flows bob and heave as pieces of crust temporarily slow the advancing fluid. Slabby pahoehoe, like exerts a lot of force on objects in its path. Here, a 10-foot-high tree is pushed over like a twig. At times, the fronts of slabby flows are amazingly thin and fluid, closely resembling normal pahoehoe. These fronts are rapidly overrun by the jumbled mass of the flow, which is 5 to 10 feet thick. Jagged slabby pahoehoe crust are preserved on many prehistoric lava flows. Real pahoehoe appears very fluid. A thin, plasticky crust forming on the cooled outside of toes helps hold their shape and can fold into miniature ropes. Bubbles within the lava are stretched and torn as the pahoehoe toes expand and move forward. This stretching is limited to the outer skin, which is about 1/16 of an inch thick on fluid Hawaiian pahoehoe. Many toes budding from active fronts merge to form larger toes. Just behind the front, an immobile crust forms on slow-moving pahoehoe. As the flow inflates, chips of glass pop off the expanding surface. Ropes form where faster-moving lava slows down, causing the thin, flexible skin to pile up and wrinkle. As the flow continues to push forward, the ropes get folded into complex, twisted forms. Ropes like these are preserved in many of the lava flows found within the western United States and are good evidence that these flows advanced as slow-moving pahoehoe. On faster-moving pahoehoe flows, the crust may become detached and get completely spun around on the surface of the flow. Crust that gets torn as the flow advances quickly remains thin and flexible, unlike the large broken plates found in slabby pahoehoe flows. The fronts of advancing Pahoehoe flows are generally less than a foot high, but can grow with time and continued lava input. This sped-up sequence shows how the thin leading edge advances. A flexible crust forms as the flow slows. It immediately begins to inflate like a balloon, filling with more lava. Time-lapse shots of a Pahoehoe flow advancing show how lava toes bud and crust over. The entire crusted surface inflates together. Incoming lava trapped beneath the crust pushes it upward. If the lava toes do not coalesce at the front, small tubes form that cool quickly and clog. Localized swelling of these narrow flow lobes produces what's known as tumuli. These flows are called hummocky Pahoehoe for their irregular lumpy surfaces. Hummocky Pahoehoe flows are caused by low lava supplies or lava moving over uneven terrain, both of which keep toes from coalescing. Some Pahoehoe flows advance as a series of long, thin fingers, but still inflate together to form a single level sheet flow. Behind the active front, the Pahoehoe inflates several feet due to the development of a rigid crust that remains at the spot where it formed. Here, a Pahoehoe flow filling a small depression grew nearly 6 feet high in just 4 hours. It advances as a series of lobes that inflate to become part of the main flow. By quickly developing a solid crust, Pahoehoe flows can preserve heat and advance great distances. Most Pahoehoe flows tend to advance very slowly, covering only a few hundred feet per hour. Fluid Pahoehoe sheet flows in Hawaii can inflate 15 to 20 feet. While this may seem like a lot, stickier continental sheet flows have inflated as much as 60 to 80 feet. Edges and even fronts of these flows are often mistaken for collapse features. Inflated flow margins may crack and begin to leak lava. Extreme pressure buildup fractures the entire flow front, pushing aside large blocks as a new flow lobe emerges. This is how many sheet flows advance. Lava that gushes from these new flow fronts is very fluid and forms extremely thin flows. The pressure inside the inflating flow can be so high that water is redissolved into the lava. When the lava breaks to the surface, the pressure is released and the water vapor effectively boils out of the lava, creating softball-sized bubbles. As a lava flow inflates, the outer cooled crust expands and cracks. Pahoehoe flows are riddled with these expansion cracks, which can get very wide in large flows. More regularly spaced cracks form in the slow-cooling interiors of thick lava flows. The evenly spaced cracks form prismatic towers called columnar joints. Erosion in older volcanic fields exposes horizontal layers with stacks of 20 to 40 foot thick inflated Pahoehoe flows. Immense inflated flows, 100 to 200 feet thick, can be seen along the Columbia River. These Pahoehoe flows covered much of Washington State 16 million years ago. When Pahoehoe lava moves through a forest, it doesn't push the trees over like an flow, but simply coats the trunks with lava that freezes against the much colder tree. Eventually, the trunk burns through, and the tree topples onto the surrounding flow, where it can form an impression in the lava. These two slightly different processes create vertical and horizontal tree molds. Tree molds are typically only found near the edges of lava flows, where they've not been covered. When trees are engulfed by fast-moving channels, the leaves and outer bark immediately burst into flames. The tree itself may remain standing for several hours, causing lava to pile and chill against the uphill side of the trunk. When the lava finally drains away, strange-looking pillars are left behind, often still encasing pieces of the tree. These lava trees are usually found very close to vents. Another bizarre feature seen on Pahoehoe lavas are hornitos. These tower or beehive shapes are built by small eruptions of spatter, far from any primary vent. Hornitos may form either by strong degassing from cracks in lava tubes and flows, or by the buildup of extreme pressure inside a lava flow. These hornitos formed on a flow that was forced to travel upslope. When Pahoehoe flows first pour over cliffs, they form delicate column structures called draperies. Lava stalactites form from the top and slowly grow downward to join the pile of drippings building up from below. Draperies are rarely preserved, as they are commonly buried by later flows. Pillow basalts form where lava erupts underwater or enters a large body of water, such as the ocean or a lake. Pillow basalts are the underwater equivalent of Pahoehoe, but produce much more spherical shapes due to the added buoyancy of the water. During emplacement in shallow water, much of the lava shatters and buries pillows with glassy black sand. Pahoehoe flows and Aa flows have strikingly different appearances, yet are often found forming together in the same lava field. Two things determine the form lava will take: the viscosity or stickiness of the lava, and the shear stress or force applied to the lava that makes it move. Viscosity is simply how resistant a fluid is to flowing. The higher the viscosity, the harder it is to get a fluid to flow. Aa is generally much more viscous than Pahoehoe. Water is a low viscosity fluid that flows very easily. It offers little resistance going over these waterfalls. Lava pouring over falls also gives the impression of a very low viscosity fluid. However, even the fluid lava within Pahoehoe toes is much stickier than water. The viscosity of lava is largely determined by its temperature and water content. The higher these are, the less viscous and more fluid the lava is. Honey behaves a lot like lava. Warm honey or honey mixed with water flows more easily than cold, sticky honey. Lava inside toes that have been cooling for only a few minutes is already considerably more viscous. It quickly becomes tacky and forms spines and needles when it is torn apart, very similar to the rough surfaces of Aa. As lava continues to cool, crystals and bubbles begin to grow in the liquid. Hot fluid lava flows with few crystals and bubbles, as seen in this microscopic view, form very thin toes, often only an inch or two thick. The outer crust is very dense due to the lack of bubbles. As a result, they strongly reflect light, giving them a metallic or steely blue appearance. As the flow advances, gas bubbles continue to form and grow, making the remaining lava more viscous. Eventually, so